I'd like to welcome everybody to the ACTU Congress. The Congress is a proud set piece in the ACTU calendar. It's where history has been made. I've been a delegate to Congress since 1986, and I've seen many debates about issues of importance to Australia, about industrial relations legislation, the change to enterprise bargaining, the changes in the economy, debates about the structure of our movement in the context of the move to amalgamation and union rationalisation. It's at Congress that every 3 years, unionists from around Australia, representing workers from every industry, every sector, men, women, migrants, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, come together to debate what matters to working people, their families and their communities. We don't just debate policies and motions, of course, we come together as a movement. At this Congress, we'll all have our say about what's on the union agenda for the next 3 years. But at the end of this Congress, we'll go out and we'll campaign for change, for a better Australia for working people. When we last met in Brisbane in June 2009, the Fair Work Act had just started to be implemented. It was not easy, but in that time we campaigned and we stood together. We got rid of individual contracts. We built a safety net that will endure into the future, notwithstanding the difficulties of award modernisation that I know we all experienced. We created a new, fairer minimum wage process. We restored the independent umpire. We made sure that every worker had an enforceable right to collectively bargain. And we didn't stop there. In the last 3 years, we've advocated minimum wage increases and we've achieved a near record $27 a week increase in 2010. Notably, the first case that was actually taken away from the so-called Fair Pay Commission and given back to Fair Work Australia, the independent umpire. And we've continued to work hard to make up the real wage loss that occurred during the period of work choices. We've achieved a national paid maternity leave scheme after a 30-year campaign. We stood alongside social and community service workers and we achieved an historic equal pay decision. We won the increase to superannuation guarantee to 12% that begins next month. We've worked with the federal Labor government to increase rights for outworkers and to establish safe rates for truck drivers and to see the beginning of a national disability insurance scheme. And we have, after a long campaign, gotten rid of the ABCC. Now, I know, and the construction unions will say more than anybody, that it's not everything that we wanted, but it is a significant win. And in all of that campaign, of course, from the yellow T-shirts and the rallies, the trials and acquittals of ARC Tribe, as we saw on the video, and Noel Washington, who's a delegate here today, this campaign showed what unions are made of. And throughout it all, we stood together. We didn't cave in. We didn't make a deal. We stood together as a united union movement. We showed that we can ignore past rivalries and we can see beyond factional differences. We've been unified and we've delivered for all workers. And in this spirit of unity, we went to 2 national conferences of the Labor Party in 2009 and 2011 and acted very differently to the way unions have traditionally acted within the Labor Party, because we fought for issues of importance for workers as unions on behalf of workers, not on a factional basis. And we got agreement to fair procurement principles that I think was a significant gain out of the 2009 National Conference. It is an issue I acknowledge that there's much more work to be done to see that the operations of those principles actually deliver. And despite apparent constitutional arguments that were put forward by the government during all of the period of the negotiation of the Fair Work Act, arbitration as a final step in the dispute settlement process in collective agreements is now part of the Labor Party platform. It's up to us to make sure it's implemented. And we have a commitment that bargaining in good faith must mean just that, good faith bargaining. When Qantas management took the arrogant step to ground its fleet, it should not have been rewarded. Australian law must not ever again allow employers to hold Australian workers and the national economy to ransom in order to get their way and to undermine workers' rights. As you know, this is my last Congress as ACTU Secretary, and I'm confident that there's a firm base to continue to build and to make a real difference to working people's lives. We've embarked on the Secure Jobs campaign as an increasing number of workers in insecure work don't have a voice. All workers deserve to be heard and deserve to have certainty and control over their working lives. We've established Australian unions as a progressive voice to create a more equitable distribution of the tax and transfer system. We've put the case, including at the Tax Forum last year, that the level of company tax in Australia is not excessive and should not be reduced. And we've argued that superannuation taxation is inequitable. I'm pleased to say that both of these elements have been picked up in the most recent federal budget, a budget that I think, notwithstanding some reservations, is truly a Labor budget. It's a budget, together with the ETS compensation packages, that focuses on the low paid, lifting the tax-free threshold, giving a helping hand to workers who are under cost of living pressures. And this, of course, is what our tax and transfer system should do. We've expanded this authoritative voice of workers to the industries that we're part of, that we know about, that we care about, and to the wider economic debate. The protection of jobs in those areas of the economy which have been under most pressure from the high dollar has been a particular focus of our work over the last year. And we have clear industrial priorities that will be discussed during this Congress. Firstly, to improve representation rights for workers, to make sure that delegates have the protections they need to do their job, and that workers have access to their union through right of entry in the workplace. And secondly, to ensure that the bargaining system operates in a better fashion. Firstly, so that bargaining that takes place at the level appropriate to the industry, so that we end the fixation that we've had in this country on enterprise bargaining for the last 20 years and provide a bargaining system that's more flexible to the needs of industry. To make sure that all workers have access to even-handed arbitration, and so that bargaining can occur about all issues that are of concern to workers, so that the antiquated concept of matters pertaining is removed from our industrial law. Of course, employer groups will not only resist this agenda, they'll continue to attack the very basis of the Fair Work Act, the right to collectively bargain, the right to have the enforceable right to collectively bargain. The reality is that some employers have never accepted that workers deserve and have that right, and to have a say over their working conditions. That's why employers have taken the J.J. Richards case to the full bench of the Federal Court. And notwithstanding that decision, which made it very clear that the Act said what we said it said, they will continue to pursue the winding back of our rights. I've no doubt that employer groups are currently writing the Coalition's IR policy as we meet. We must continue to protect the rights of workers. The fact is that work choices was an aberration in the history of industrial relations in this country. Unfortunately, many employer groups are using it as their benchmark for a new system. And we saw this in the review of the Fair Work Act that's currently underway and will report soon. Employer groups actually ignored the terms of reference completely and instead made submissions about their IR wish list, which of course is about cutting workers' rights and conditions. And on that list were the ability to make individual flexibility clauses a condition of employment, effectively a return to take it or leave it AWAs. An end to penalty rates and other important conditions like redundancy pay. The abolition of the equal pay requirements. Further limitations to unfair dismissal protections. Undermining workers' representational rights, their rights to freedom of association, their rights not to be discriminated against because they're a union member, and the reinstatement of all the repressive aspects of the ABCC. And in the award review, which is just about to commence or is commencing, it's not surprising that the employer's first application before Fair Work Australia was to vary awards to get rid of penalty rates. What this does, of course, delegates, is to remind us of what unions do and why it's important. Without your work every day to protect and extend workers' rights, the wish list that I've just gone through would be a reality for workers across Australia. This week, the minimum wages case has actually started. In fact, yesterday, the employer group stood up on their feet in front of the minimum wage setting panel of Fair Work Australia and put their case. The Australian Industry Group says that Australia's lowest paid workers should only get a $14 increase. ACTU says there should only be a $9.40 increase. And the Australian Retailers Association, which is one of these lunatic groups that seems to frequent the employer side, I emphasise, Joe, the employer side of the retail industry, said that actually there shouldn't be any increase at all. So each one of these employer claims would mean a real wage cut for over 1.4 million award-dependent workers. That's why what unions do is so important, because we can make a real difference to the lives of millions of workers. And it is a heavy responsibility. That's why, as Jed has said, the union movement has zero tolerance for corruption, or the misuse of members' funds, or the maladministration of union affairs. Everyone here is alarmed at the allegation that members' money has been misused. It is not acceptable, and it will not be tolerated by the Australian union movement. And that's why the ACTU executive took a strong stand on this issue. And that's why the Congress needs to consider what needs to be done in this area further. But equally, we won't allow it to distract us from the important work we do. We'll be more determined than ever to deliver for working people. I don't want you to forget about the difference your work makes for workers throughout Australia. Right now, as we meet, organisers are making sure workers are getting fair redundancy and retraining packages at Holden and access to their entitlements at CMI. Right now, union officials in Victoria are negotiating an enterprise agreement for mental health workers. Right now, many hundreds of workers in the Queensland coalfields are part of one of Australia's longest-running disputes as BHP continues to deny workers their rights to representation. Right now, union organisers are giving a voice to the precarious work of the cleaning industry in retail stores so that workers at Spotless have a collective agreement. And every union in this hall will have examples, similar examples. What you do, I know, is a hard job, but it's an important job. I've been a union official now for 35 years and I've never wanted to do anything else. I have been very grateful for the MISO's members, MISO's LHMU United Voice, the cleaners, security guards, paintry workers, childcare workers and home care workers who I've represented. And all of the union members that I've come in contact with in the 5 years I've been ACTU Secretary. But I have never forgotten the day when I was holding meetings with a group of cleaners, actually at the start, towards the start of the Clean Start campaign, where a small Greek woman came up to me afterwards and she said she didn't speak much English and that I and the union were important to her because we were her voice. Without the union, she told me, she would have no voice. So there is no greater responsibility, no greater honour to represent working people. In the last 5 years, union density has stabilised. I think that's been an achievement. Today, 1 in every 5 workers are members of a union. 13 years ago, I was a member of the Unions at Work delegation where the union change program began in our broader movement, although of course a range of affiliates, including my own, had started that process earlier. And stopping the decline in the 1990s has been an achievement for Australian unions, but it's not enough. We must continue to focus on organising and growth. We must grow so that our members have the power they need to make their lives better, so that we continue to deliver for all working people in Australia, so that we can turn back the rising inequality in Australia. In the last 30 years, the richest 1% of Australians' share of the national income has almost doubled. Now, 9% of the national income belongs to just 1% of Australians. It is shameful that in Australia, a country that prides itself on a fair go of being an equal society, that in fact it's more unequal, our country is more unequal than most OECD countries. But we know from the research that we did last year that Australians want a more equal society. And as union official, I don't think we should ever forget that our responsibility is first to the most vulnerable in our society. That's why I've always fought hard for a decent minimum wage increases and for a strong safety net. In the mid-1990s, the minimum wage was 54% of average full-time earnings. 1 decade on now, it's less than half, only 44% of average full-time earnings. So those who are the least well off, the lowest paid in the community, have actually gone backwards compared to the rest of the workforce. So I think as a union movement, we must continue to do better by those who are unable to stand up for themselves. There is, delegates, a real danger of an Abbott government. That's why, apart from anything else, we need to come out of this Congress more unified than ever. We must build on what has been achieved. We mustn't take a backward step. We have a tradition in Australia to debate our differences at Congress and then to speak as one. Australia is one of the few countries in the world that has one peak council to which all unions are affiliated. The ACTU is not just an office or a series of governing bodies, but in fact a manifestation of the collective aspirations of working people. And united, we can defeat the attacks against workers and make Australia a fairer society. Thank you.